Okay, so long-term decarbonisation targets for Australia, we have them at state level. So with individual state jurisdictions, in fact, without exception, have now committed to net zero 2050. And actually the state governments in Australia do have quite a bit of power, decision-making power in the energy sector. So that is definitely an important part of the policy landscape. At federal level though, and bearing in mind that the federal government does control the purse strings around subsidies, taxation, much more so than the state governments do, there is no long-term decarbonisation target. It has been very politically fraught in the discussion, and still is today. We have committed to a Paris target of 26 to 28% reduction in economy-wide CO2 by 2030. And it looks like in our BAU scenario, we will hit that. But the 2050 target, which is obviously much more ambitious than our 2030 target, would require a huge scaling up. There is no political consensus at the federal level as we stand today. Now, our Prime Minister has just been at the G7, and of course there were discussions happening between Biden and Johnson and our PM Scott Morrison, and there were discussions around Australia's commitment to net zero 2050. There's a loose commitment, but it hasn't yet translated into a firm commitment. And the political problems, even after some comments made in the UK at the G7, political problems back home sort of flared up again within the ruling coalition party. So I don't think we can say we've got a political consensus around net zero 2050 at this stage. So in terms of what a net zero 2050 scenario would look like for Australia, we have done quite a bit of modelling in this space. We've got our sort of current policies, business as usual reference case, and that sees coal plants closing, at the end of their design life, which is typically 50 years, and we see the power sector decarbonised by 2050 broadly. But then when we look at a net zero 2050 trajectory, that of course being economy-wide net zero, we see the power sector needs to be decarbonised by the mid-2030s, really, because then there's significant electrification which needs to take place across other sectors of the economy to decarbonise the rest of the economy by 2050. And so that scale of demand differences between a net zero trajectory and a business as usual trajectory is orders of magnitude. It's very significant when we look at firstly electric vehicles, so transport and electrification of transport. That alone adds around 80% to the electricity demand by 2050. And if we add on top of that the potential for green export, so renewable exports from Australia, because we have abundant, cheap renewables, and they can be exported potentially in the future in the form of hydrogen, so green ammonia, for example, into countries in Asia in particular that don't have the same natural resources and land availability. And so there's a very significant difference between a net zero trajectory and a business as usual trajectory. And I think the conversation needs to really pick up within industry and government on the difference between those two.